Some notes that's been the highlight from your presentation is the increasing fraud is now the international problems, and it is now committed online. He also explained the three types of crime. Those are ghost invoice, fraudulent contracts, and also the CEO fraud. And her research shows that fraudsters can adapt with business characteristics of companies, such as company size and season. So season is very interesting because since fraudsters deal with the season, so for all participants, you can give the questions to Professor Young about this. So thank you so much, Professor Young, for your presentation. Now from Netherlands, we fly to Australia. We will meet our fifth. He is an associate professor at the University of Sydney Business School. His research focuses on the consequences of anti-financial crime regulation on business model, and business risk. He has worked as a consultant to the United Nations, the OECD-based Financial Action Task Force, the Asia-Pacific Group of Money Laundering, and the Australian Financial Service Council. His PhD was completed from Cambridge University. So, hi, Dr. David Chaikin.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the University of Sebelas Indonesia and the Audit Board of Indonesia for organizing this unique international webinar. And when I was thinking about what I should be writing or talking about, what immediately hit me was the role of technology. And so I've entitled my talk, I'm not sure whether they can put up the slides for me, Big Data and Financial Crime Responses. And let me just say a few words about technology. Technology has a credible potential to assist in the detection, investigation, and prosecution of financial crime. And we've heard today a discussion about the potential of digital forensics, the role, potential ways that businesses can protect itself. This is particularly the case in what I call, this is the golden age of big data. Everything these days is recorded in a digital format, our own personal lives, our government dealings, as well as the whole corporate world. And this is permanent. And this provides, as I said, great opportunities in terms of dealing with financial crime. But we must remember that technology can and has been and continues to be used by criminals, and indeed it tends to be used by criminals in a more efficient way because it's clearly in their own interest. Technology is used both to avoid detection, but also to hide the proceeds of fraud. Technology can be subverted by criminals. And even in the case of digital forensics, which is something I wrote about 13 years ago, the role of network evidence and its limits. But even something like digital forensics can be corrupted. And ultimately, whatever technology can do, we rely on the human dimension, what we call human intelligence, power of humans. And if we look at the greatest success story in terms of the fighting financial crime, and I think that we see that in the United States, their success has largely depended, in the most important cases, on sting and undercover operations, which essentially involves penetration of organised crime groups by humans, and technology assists, but technology is only one part of the answer. If we go to the next slide, I want to say something about secrecy, because secrecy has been presented as the greatest obstacle in the detention and recovery of illicit assets. And Switzerland has earned that reputation of being a major deposit point for illicit money. A country with less than 9 million people, they have a third of the private wealth assets of the world. Now, this was achieved by Switzerland by what I call their bank secrecy model, in terms of not just secrecy in terms of banking, corporate secrecy. You heard from Dr. Dominic about beneficial ownership and professional secrecy. Their model was essentially copied by over 80 offshore financial centers. But it was not just the law that was important. Anybody can create a law. It's what the Swiss banks spent hundreds of millions of dollars of essentially creating cybersecurity practices to protect their financial data of their clients. There has been a three-level system of access and password security. There's very sophisticated surveillance and audit systems, and bank managers were trained. All the cybersecurity practices were designed to protect the secrets. The reason I know a little bit about that is I had a client when I was in private practice, and he was accused by the Swiss government of engaging in economic espionage on behalf of the Philippine government when they were seeking to trace and recover the assets of the deposed dictator of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos. And despite all those security measures, there was a vulnerability. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. Can we go next? Yes. Sorry, before I come to that, I put this table up here just to show you some of the cases where corruption money has been frozen in Swiss banks. The case I was involved was Marcos. And although you see the figure of $356 million frozen, which grew up to $657 million, because contrary to what said, they do pay interest on frozen money in Switzerland, that only represented about 5% of the amount of money that was actually stolen. So most cases, in terms of, even though these are presented as successful, in terms of freezing of money, and these all involve mainly developing countries, as you can see from that list, largely it's only a tip in the ocean. Now, given there's an Indonesia audience, the question you might want to ask is, why is there no Indonesian money frozen in Swiss banks? But that's another question for another day. If we go to the next slide, what's happened in Switzerland is essentially their financial secrecy model has been destroyed because of various vulnerabilities. And the first, I'm just going to mention one. Cybersecurity in Swiss banks in the late 1980s was outsourced to third parties. And the consequence of that was that there was a new vulnerability because these third parties could be corrupted, and they were. And as a consequence of that, there was a whole series of vulnerabilities in the whole Swiss banking system. And you can see these other factors that have played into the undermining of the offshore financial secrecy model. If we go to the next slide, in 2009, this really broke Swiss bank secrecy. UBS, which was the biggest wealth manager in Switzerland, was compelled not only to pay a $780 million fine for aiding US taxpayers in a $20 billion tax evasion scam, but were also forced to disclose the identity of their clients. Now, that was really the death knell of Swiss banking as far as the United States was concerned. Interestingly, Birkenfeld, who was a wealth manager at UBS, he became a whistleblower who was critical to the actual case itself. And under the US system, unlike most other countries, it's possible for you to recover as a whistleblower and be rewarded for disclosures. And in fact, Bradley Birkenfeld received $104 million for assisting the US government to recover the assets. And actually, although he received $104 million, he's suing the US government because he says he didn't receive enough. They didn't pay him enough money. Now, the effect of this case was essentially to eliminate offshore financial secrecy as far as the United States was concerned. The United States introduced the Foreign Tax Compliance Act, and that was for their own benefit. But if somebody asks me, is Swiss bank secrecy working? Well, it still works for developing, looting of developing countries. If we go to the next slide. As I said, we live in a world of big data. Now, what I've listed there is a series of cases where there's been massive leakage or theft of financial information from major offshore financial centers. We have Liechtenstein, Cayman Islands, Singapore, we have Luxembourg, Switzerland, Panama, and so forth. If we just go to the next one, please, next slide. Thank you. And these can be both, a number of them have been anonymous. We just go to the next one if we can. Next slide. Just to give you the amount of information that's being disclosed. This is all secret information. 4 terabytes of data. Panama, Paradise, all these cases are revealing huge amounts of information, which is then being examined by governments, by journalists, in a way to assist in the investigation of financial crime. If you just go to the next slide, thank you. And just to tie this up in terms of, how it's actually being used. If you get from that data, let's say you find out that David Chaikin is a secret owner of a company. You didn't know about that. And the Australians say, he owns that company. And then we go to the next slide. And then, because in Australia, just like Indonesia, we collect information. The banks and financial institutions are required to report every international fund transfer in and out of that jurisdiction. You put those two facts together. David Chaikin is a secret beneficial owner of a company we never knew about. And we find in one of those international fund transfers the name of that company. You immediately have an investigatory trial which can lead to the investigation, I'm using myself as an example, for tax evasion and so forth. It's finding out, the key thing in international finance is finding out things you are not supposed to find out about. The secret information. And if you can use that data with publicly available data, or today we have access to all this social media data, with big data, you will find connections and find new investigative leads which will allow you to find things that you're never supposed to discover. And we just go to the next slide. Thank you. Because whistleblowers are critical to detection of financial crime. If you look at that slide, you can see that whistleblowers actually were responsible for 42% for detection of corporate fraud. We just go to the final slide. There are a number, just the next slide, thank you. There's a number of public policy issues. I won't have time to go through all those, but these are critical issues that will have to be looked at in terms of conflicting stakeholders. The conflict between the right of privacy and law enforcement need for maximum information to combat serious financial crime. How do we regulate the vast growth in data information? How do we regulate technology which can be used for good purposes and bad purposes? And this growing threat of state-sponsored cyber intrusions into private and public data information sources. How are individual states going to respond to that? And how does that fit into this whole question of international financial crime and cooperation? So, and the last slide, if you want to look at a few references, some of the things that I'm talking about in today's lecture, you could find there. We must remember that international financial crime, money laundering, is the art of deception. Individuals can be deceived, machines can be deceived, and the clever criminals who are essentially in an arms race with governments will utilize all sorts of illegal and dirty methods where, on the other hand, you know, in democracies, we must play by the rule of law in the games, so we are at a disadvantage. But at the end of the day, you know, we fight commercial crime, but we must ensure that in fighting it, we still retain the important values of our systems of government and values of our population. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. David Taken, for your presentation. I'll take several notes that you mentioned about the whistleblower paradigm. For one side, whistleblower is critical, right, to detect the financial crime. You say that your study shows that 40% of corporate fraud is detected by the tips of whistleblower. But when the person shares information for purposes of making it publicly known, that would be a different case, the leaker. So thank you so much, Dr. David, for your presentation. Okay, so before we move to our next speaker, I would like to inform you, this is the good news, that you can now access our university YouTube channel, Universitas 11 Maret, and also the Instagram of Center for Fintech and Banking, Universitas 11 Maret, to join with us. We are really sorry for the technical problem. And now you can access and join this webinar through YouTube channel of Universitas 11 Maret and also using Instagram Live. So I will call the sixth speaker of this international webinar. He is an associate professor and also director of Research Management Center in CF Malaysia. His area of specialization is applied microeconomics with strong interest in economics of crime, natural disaster, and military expenditure. He graduated with a PhD in economics from University Putra, Malaysia. So please welcome Dr. Baharom Abdul Hamid.
Thank you very much, Yoshio. Assalamualaikum. Very good evening. It's been an honor to participate in this, and I would like to congratulate University 11 Maret for organizing this. and bringing a lot of experts into here. I'll be tackling it from a slightly different angle. We have seen all the learned professors, all the researchers have been looking at it from mostly the micro level, the firm level, and we have looked from the forensic accounting and all those. But I would like to take a slight twist. I would like to take a look at from the macro level, and I do understand about the limited time that given to all the speakers. We would like to accommodate as much as possible subject matter expert to talk on this international webinar. So I would consider my task, if I could convince, if I could relay my message, the importance of what we call a financial crime risk assessment. In order for us to do a financial crime risk management, in order for us to manage financial crime, we need to assess the risk. While the developed countries, and there are some of the countries in Asia Pacific, which has taken positive steps, which have set up a national level council and have issued a national level crime risk assessment. And this is crucial because we have to understand that these financial crimes are predicate to money laundering and terrorist financing. And it is not a single agency's job or task that could tackle it, but rather a combination of many agencies under the umbrella. For example, I'm working currently in the context of Malaysia, whereby we have what we call a National Crime Center, NCC, and we are working together with 16 agencies, the anti-bribery, the domestic trade, the police, the central bank, and others, the income tax department, and so on. So if we look at it, you know, because the issue of this financial crime, because it threatens the safety and the soundness of the global financial systems. And above that, you know, the crime threatens the security and safety of the nation. It's quite wide-ranging. You know, these crimes range from a fairly simple operations, like what we have seen some of the professors presenting earlier, to highly sophisticated terrorism. And financial crime is different from the normal crimes. In normal crimes, you come face to face with the criminals. You know where the criminals are, what they are doing. But in this financial crime, it's cross-border. You know, sometimes the criminal or the perpetrator could be thousands of miles away or the other side of the globe. So let me just go through a very simple presentation here. Like I said, what I would like to instill is I would like to instill the importance of having a financial crime risk assessment. And this is not something new. Like I said, World Bank have issued 2 different versions of templates to assess the crime. And bear in mind, this financial crime is very country specific. So I will just go through a brief, what are the financial crime, who are the people behind this financial crime, the types of financial crime, and why it is important for us to understand so that we could tackle it before it becomes a predicate to money laundering or terrorist financing. So in a nutshell, we could segregate this financial crime into what we call 2 essentially different, but it is closely related types of conduct, I would say. Firstly, these are the activities that normally we say that dishonestly generate wealth for those engaged in the conduct in questions, like Prof. David have explained earlier. For example, the exploitation of insider information or the acquisition of another person's property by deceit, you know, which will invariably be done with the intention of securing a material benefit. Alternatively, a person may engage in deceit to secure material benefit for another. However, the other side of it, the second part of it, this is what we call, these are also financial crimes that do not involve the dishonestly taking of benefit, but that protect the benefit that had already been obtained, or to facilitate the taking of such benefit. An example of such conduct is where someone attempts to launder criminal proceeds of another offense in order to place the proceeds beyond the reach of the law. I'm pretty sure most of the people who are on this webinar are very much well aware of why Malaysia being infamous for one of the biggest, if not the biggest, money laundering case, which is now a classic case study, which is known as the 1MDB. So the elements of vulnerability, the elements of threat, and these are what I would like to bring into the picture here, and how we can nip the, okay, thank you, and how we can nip it in the bud before it gets worse. So who commits this crime, this financial crime? So basically the people who are behind this financial crime are what we call, like, it could be organized criminals, it could be corrupt heads of state, business leaders, employees, and like what have been shared earlier. From outside the company, as also been shared earlier, and increasingly the external fraudster is colluding with an employee to achieve bigger and better results more easily. And finally, the successful individual criminal, serial or opportunist fraudster in possession of these proceeds are a further group of people who committed financial crime. So what are the main types of this financial crime that we're talking here? These are the examples of mainly what are the financial crimes that is that's looked at cross-country analysis: fraud, electronic crime, money laundering, terrorist financing, bribery and corruption, market abuse and insider dealing, and information security. And some of these are sometimes not standalone, it is interrelated. For example, bribery and corruption can lead to money laundering, fraud can lead to money laundering, and this can lead to terrorist financing, so forth and so forth. So how is this terrorist financing is related, or how we say that this financial crime are predicate to terrorist financing? So if you look at closely, the factors that promote terrorist activities, of course, is the ability of the terrorist organization to obtain financial support, as well as to maintain strong financial infrastructure. So if you look carefully, it is claimed that terrorist organization, where do they secure the fund from? How do they get the fund from? It could be legitimate sources. It could be abuse of charities or legitimate businesses, which is used to camouflage. Self-financing through their ardent members or supporters. Criminal activities, state sponsors, and activities in failed states and other safe haven. So if you look at the World Bank's template, like I said, either you look at the first generation or the second generation, there are the two important components there: vulnerability, threat. And if you look closely, the vulnerability of both money laundering and terrorist financing is the same. So where is the difference? The difference is in the threat analysis. So if you look at the vulnerability analysis, like I said, if you look at the classic case of 1MDB, how vulnerable it is, how fragile it is, when you have the head of the country also heading the other agencies. So this shows how vulnerable. This is what we call the legal, the judicial, and the institutional framework. Same as go as the economic and geographical environment, whether the country is landlocked, whether the country has a border that is vulnerable, as well as the financial institutions. If you look, like I said earlier, the difference between money laundering and terrorist financing risk assessment templates is the threat analysis. So what is needed here is the linkage between the agencies to share the data. The data that is collected needs to be shared among the different agencies so that you could easily link it and you could map it where the money is originated from and where the money is flowing to. And I totally agree when one of the professors was sharing earlier his study on the cultural background of this perpetrators, or we call it the offenders, yes, it plays a big role. It's not trying to stereotype, it's not trying to be playing along the racist kind, but there is a certain shift, or we call a certain weightage to a certain origin and so on. So if you look carefully, this is how the whole matrix works in. So once you have identified the overall vulnerability and the overall threat, whether it is low, it is medium low, high, and then you could focus your energy, you could focus the crime fighting, or you could focus the risk management according to the crime, according to the agencies, and according to the types of crimes or types of the people who originate. And it's what we call a continuous effort. So, number one, what is important here? Data, the information that is collected across these agencies, across different enforcement agencies. All this information then are parked under a central agency, what we call, a national level committee. And this information or data are then evaluated, analyzed, and the results of this analysis is then reported back to the respective agencies for them to review and their actions to be taken. And again, the cycle will continue. It's a continuous cycle. It is not something, a journey that starts and stops. So it's a continuous cycle with new information, with new data, and with new developments. And if you look at the national level committee, you see, if you cannot be just looking at the financial crime angle alone. So you need to look at the severe crime. You need to look at the tax evasion. We need to take a good look at the shadow economy. We need to look at the illegal immigration, because not only theoretically, but empirically, these are what we say is closely related to the level of financial crime, fraud, and cybersecurity. So this national level committee, like what I have said earlier, collect the data from all the respective agencies. Among the countries that which are actively promoting this are such as Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand, which I would say, apart from the other developed countries. It's still very alien to other countries like Malaysia and Indonesia. So the formation of the national level committee is what I call to start the ball rolling. So you need to have a national level committee that looks at the macro level, which has representatives from all the relevant agencies that are keeping the data. For example, like I said, the taxation department, the Royal Customs and Excise Department, the police department, immigration department, and others. And all these agencies will collect and share the data to the national level committee. And again, like I said, this data will be analyzed and then identify the threat and the vulnerability. Once you have collected and collated the data and you do a simple analysis, you would at least find what we call a trending analysis. And you could find what are the prevailing types of crime, what are the prevailing offenders, who they originate from which part of the world, what is their background, and so on. So this identification of the threat then reclassified as, is it low, is it high, is it medium, and so on. Then what is the threat? So you look at the two different angles. One is the vulnerability, and that is the threat. Vulnerability is basically looking at the fragility and how exposed and what is the probability of it happening. Threat on the other side is what is the risk? Is it high risk? What is the threat to the country, and so on. Analyzing the data is only half the job. The dissemination of the analysis to the departments, that is the important part. So the dissemination, and so that these departments would understand and they would have to take the proactive agency. And of course, once we have done this, the policy response, which would have to be done with collaboration with the national level committee. Like I said, I know the time, because of the time, But what my main intention today is to introduce the importance of what I call financial crime risk assessment. Because if you could do the financial crime risk assessment properly, and definitely the financial crime risk management could be done. You can't manage without identifying or assessing the risk. And you cannot identify the risk if every department or agencies work in silo. So to start the ball rolling, every single country, every single nation should have a national level committee which analyze, which disseminate. I would be more than happy if I have triggered some of this, and in case there are other opportunities for me to share the analysis that I have done, the research that I have done based on this, I am more than happy. I hope to see you in the future, and I'm always available with my email in case any of the participants or the fellow speakers needs to have any further information or further data or further things. I'm more than available. Again, I would like to congratulate University 11 Maret for organizing this and bringing together all these subject matter experts. It's an eye opener, like I said, even for me myself. Because I'm more involved on the macro level data, but today I've listened to the other experts, and it gives me a different perspective. Thank you very much, Yoshio. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam, Dr. Baharom. Yeah, thank you for reminding us the importance of the assessment of financial crime risk. And it is also interesting about your question, how is financial crime linked to the terrorist financing? I believe it can stimulate many questions from the participants regarding to the questions. So thank you so much, Dr. Baharom. Now, let's meet our seventh speaker. He is Indonesian. So we go back to Indonesia. He is an auditor from the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. His education was completed from Universitas 11 Maret, Melbourne University, Australia, and his PhD was completed from Loughborough University in United Kingdom with specialization area in accounting. So without further ado, I will say hi, hello, Pak Iqbal.
Hi, Mas Yosi. Thank you very much.
The time is yours, Pak Iqbal.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, Dr. Agung Firman Sampurna, CSFA, BPKRI Chairman, Professor Dr. Jamal Wibowo, the 11 Maret University Director, all distinguished panelists from all over the world, and distinguished participants, especially those of my colleagues from the Supreme Audit Court of Republic of Indonesia, who still make your time until now. Thank you very much for your time and attention. All right, this evening we have discussed a lot what is financial crime, fraud, and cybersecurity, how significant the damage caused by it to the economy, and some of possible solutions for these issues so far, including a very comprehensive presentation from Dr. Agung Firman Sampurna, CSFA, regarding cybersecurity and digital forensic. In this session, I will present another perspective on dealing with this situation. So, according to some studies and surveys, we find out that audits and whistleblowing systems may reduce fraud, other financial crimes, and cybersecurity attacks. It can also mitigate the impact and increase organization response to the risk. So, let's move on to the first slide, the background. On many occasions, the revelation of fraud, other financial crimes, and cyber attack cases begins not from a complex auditing procedures, not either from a complicated wiretap technique of law enforcement officials like the Anti-Corruption Commission in Indonesia, but very often it starts from a leak of an insider who may be involved but feels guilty about his or her mistakes, or maybe those who has merely witnessed the cases without being able to prevent it. Obviously, by combining technology and human capabilities, it will double the effectiveness of fraud detection system in our organization. So the idea behind the insider approach is that the organization members are the people who know very well the organization business process, They can see the unethical behavior directly in their daily working activity with less effort and cost. Which usually incurred significant amount of money and manpower in order to reveal this scandal when the organization hires external monitoring system. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Here, I would like to emphasize the definition of whistleblowing system, just in case we never heard about this before. So what is whistleblowing system? The whistleblowing system is the disclosure by organization members, either former or current, of illegal, immoral, or illegitimate practices under the control of their employers to persons or organizations that may be able to effect action. Here, the key point that we need to report the wrongdoing to the person who may be able to handle or to fix or to make improvement to the situation. Another definition from other scholars like Job in 1999, who defined whistleblowing as a deliberate, non-obligatory act of disclosure which gets onto public record is made by a person who has privileged access to data or information of an organization about non-trivial illegality or other wrongdoing, whether actual, suspected, or anticipated, which implicates and is under the control of that organization to an external entity having potential to rectify the wrongdoing. And here the next slide, we already here, the whistleblowing system as anti-fraud and enhancement of cybersecurity system. So let's see from the data and information about the whistleblowing system itself. First of all, in the US, since it was first introduced, this program has succeeded to recover a significant amount of state loss from corporate fraud. In a period of 11 years, from 1986 to 1997, according to Roca and Kleiner in 2005 study, the US government recovered more than 1.8 billion in 225 cases. And the whistleblower itself involved nearly collected 200 million USD. This is quite huge money compared to the total amount of the case itself. And also some of us may have heard the story about Cynthia Cooper and Sharon Watkins. They were the person behind the disclosure of the WorldCom and Enron scandal. And also Jeffrey Wigan, a whistleblower in the tobacco industry. He himself testified before the court that eventually led to the tobacco industry 246 billion litigation settlement. And again, this is a quite huge of money that the government can recover from one industry itself. And next is from Indonesia. We have Vincentius Amin Sutanto, Agus Condro, Bambang Sukoco, and Susno Duaji as well-known figures for their actions in exposing fraud and other financial crimes cases. When we talk about cybersecurity, we might also need to consider the following story. This is not a true story, actually, but it might be relevant for some of us. Your company's security controls are lacking, and a high-level employee in IT is naturally worried. He is addressed his concern a number of times. That he said that employees are regularly transmitting unencrypted information, sharing password, and using non-compliant cloud services to share data and sensitive client-side IP. This doesn't seem, unfortunately, this doesn't seem overly alarming for the senior management. They said that we have all made similar mistakes, so the comments fall on deaf ears and operations continue like usual. A few months later, however, the employee becomes increasingly vocal. So senior management decides to let him go. Is the problem solved now, or the problem might just be beginning? So in situation like this, whistleblowing system become more relevant for cybersecurity enhancement. And then the initial detection of financial crime and fraud. The biennial surveys from the ACFA consistently put whistleblowing tip-offs as the most common method to detect fraudulent acts. In the 2020 surveys, the current or latest survey, ACFA mentioned that as in previous years, tip-offs or whistleblowers were in the top position around 43% of respondents following the whistleblowing system, the initial detection system for occupational fraud, followed by fraud investigation team and internal audit by 14% and 12% respectively, while external audits account for about 1% only. Let's move on to the next slide that we're gonna discuss about issues in the whistleblowing system. Apart from the notable effect of whistleblowing systems in detecting fraud, other financial crimes, and cybersecurity, critical scholars elaborate some negative opinions on whistleblowers. For example, on many occasions, whistleblowers report only trivial or just daily gossip or complaints based on their misleading judgment in the situation. Arbitrarian whistleblower might also take advantage of the circumstances by reporting baseless allegations using anonymous features and confidential channels in response to some perceived harm or wrongdoing by another party, such as a supervisor or other employees, just because this employee doesn't like them. This is very alarming. Just be careful if you want to implement whistleblowing system in your organization. And also, disruptive employee often misuse the whistleblower protection status to avoid dismissal or disciplinary procedures. We will look more widely and deeply at these issues. So the first one is who can blow the whistle, and the second one, who should be responsible for handling the report, and then the third one, what channels should be provided. So for the next slide, we talk about who can blow the whistle. So is it only for insiders and relevant parties, or should be widely accessible to members of the public? We choose to open the policy to members of the public. Brown, according to the study from Brown in 2006, this has two possible shortcomings. The first one is information provided by external individuals might not be as important as information from insider. And then the second one, these whistleblowers might not face the same risks and difficulties compared to insiders who often experience harassment, victimization, demotion, suspension, and prosecution from their colleagues and institutions. However, another perspective views this issue differently. If legislation and internal organization policies prohibit potential whistleblowing from ordinary citizens, there is a possibility of losing significant information from them, as in many cases, these people hold accurate information regarding fraud and other financial crimes from their interactions with the organization members who deliver services. The second issue is who should be responsible for handling the report. The discourse about who will receive and deal with the report is interesting and relevant to the current discussion, considering that this factor can determine the success of the anti-fraud program. Captain 2002 argued that a clear structure and procedures for reporting incidents should exist to put in place a sound reporting system. Thus, the potential whistleblower will have a complete picture in mind about who will receive, assess, investigate, and take follow-up action on the report. In turn, it will encourage and increase employee confidence to blow the whistle. The notion of specifying whistleblowing channels and recipients to ensure the success of whistleblowing program is supported by a wide variety of literature. For example, SCFE 2020 lists top 3 parties whistleblowers reported to. They are direct supervisor, fraud investigation team, and internal audit accounted for 28%, 14%, and 12% respectively. So let's move on to the next slide. What channels should be provided? An organization can establish a whistleblowing system in a wide variety of ways. Thank you. SCFE classified 5 different formal reporting mechanisms, i.e. telephone hotline, email, web-based, mail letter, and fax. Besides those 5 channels, SCFE also mentioned direct reporting channels, such as reporting directly in a personal meeting with supervisor, company executive, or a fraud investigation team. The discussion of whistleblowing channels raises other important questions to discuss, whether the report must be submitted in written or oral form, in person, or through indirect channels such as telephone, email, or web-based application. Direct reporting direct reporting facilitates a two-way communication where the complainant and the recipient may confirm and dig deeper into the information further without hesitation and time delay. However, it may be risky for the complainant since his or her identity can easily be exposed to third parties or the person being reported, hence increase the likelihood of retaliation. By contrast, in direct reporting system via email, hotline, or web-based application, guarantee more confidentiality and also facilitate anonymous reporting. Prior studies show that employees and members of the public are more courageous to report if confidential and anonymous reporting exists. The absence of such a system may discourage people from reporting the wrongdoing. And then let's move on to the next slide, key success factors to implement whistleblowing system in our organization. Here we highlight 3 different key success factors. They are strong commitment from high-level management. This is really important to give the guarantee, to give like a reliability to trust to the members of organization that the system is guaranteed by the high-level management. And then the second one is massive dissemination program. And then the last one is proof of actual cases. Thank you very much for your attention. That's all my presentation, and yeah, see you again. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Whistleblowing system as anti-fraud and enhancement of cybersecurity systems. Yeah. So he stressed on the commitments, massive dissemination, and proof actual cases are needed to do that. And the issue will be who can blow the whistle and who will handle the report and what channels provided to blow the whistle. So thank you so much, Dr. Iqbal, for your presentation. So I would like to say hi to our 8th speaker. He is Dr. Richard Alexander. He finally joined with us now. So let me introduce himself. He is a lecturer in financial law at School of Finance and Management and School of Law, SOAS University of London. He is also a financial law program director at Center for Financial and Management Studies, as well as academic teaching and research. Dr. Richard is also active in professional training, as has to date been involved in programs in jurisdiction, including in South Africa, Nigeria, Sudan, China, and Italy. So, hello, Dr. Richard Alexander. We finally meet you.
Yes. Hi, Yoshia. Thank you for your patience. It's a great pleasure to be here, and my great thanks to Universitas 11 Maret for this kind invitation. This is the first time that as you kindly said, I've participated in a number of programs in a number of jurisdictions. This is the first time for me in Indonesia, but I very much hope it will not be the last. So time is pressing, so let us press on. And hopefully this will share. And if not, I will call on. If not, I will call on your colleagues. But hopefully this will share. I'd like to talk about impersonation of line managers as a particular type of email frauds. We're all familiar with the use of email now to commit fraud. As we'll see, this particular one does not just make use of email, but makes use of information, and as we'll see, even photographs, harvested from the websites of universities, including my own. So, how does it work? Now, hopefully we move. So the basic fraud. This is common in universities in both the United Kingdom and in the United States. A colleague of mine who was Dean of Students at Cal Weston Law School in California in the United States She said, yes, they'd had this as well. Yes, please do. Yeah, by all means, take control of my screen. Thanks. Anyway, so the basic fraud is that the fraudster emails a member of staff, might be impersonating the head of department, in our case, or it might be the dean. It persuades the colleague to buy a large value of transferable assets. A popular one in the UK is iTunes cards, and email them to you, and email them to the fraudster. They say, we'll reimburse you the next day. Of course, the next day, the genuine head of department said, can we go back one slide, please? Just go back to the previous one. The next day, the genuine head of department said, that wasn't me. I never asked you to buy these. The fraud has now been discovered, but by now, the assets have already been sent. So next slide, and we'll look at how it actually works. So step one, the fraudster identifies the current head of department. And as we'll see, fraudsters now keep up to date on this. They will go into the university website. I won't say they hack into it because, as we'll see, this information is usually publicly available, often for marketing purposes, also for communication with colleagues. So we identify the current head of department. Now let's suppose that I am the head. Let's suppose that I am the head of the School of Finance and Management Studies. We see his name is Dr. Richard Alexander. So they'll then create an email address with the same name. So, for example, I'm using my own name, but this is a pattern taken from impersonations that I've seen at my own university. Dr. Richard Alexander at gmail.com. But not yet. But there's a risk that maybe the recipient, maybe the colleague will say, "Hang on, hold on a second. That's not his email. That's not his normal email address. That's not the work email address. There's something strange here." So a sophisticated fraudster, to make it look more convincing, will take the photo. We'll take the photo, my photo, from my web page on the university website, and include it in the sender ID of the email. So when it appears, up comes from Richard Alexander, or from Dr. Richard Alexander, with my photo on it. So let's say Yoshio or David Chaikin. As soon as they open the email, they see my face there. Oh, it's him. And it also, because they focus in on my picture, this distracts their attention from the actual email address of the sender. They may not even notice that this is actually Dr. Richard Alexander at gmail.com, not my normal SARS email address. Next slide. Then they email the colleagues in the department. These are the victims of the fraud. Next slide. And it's a gentle lead up. Many of us are familiar with the previous type of email fraud. That many of us may have got this. My wallet and passport have been stolen, and I'm stuck in. If it's sent to a European or an American, they might say I'm stuck in Jakarta. If it was sent to someone at Sebelas Maret, they might say I'm stuck in Rio de Janeiro or in Vancouver or wherever. My wallet's been stolen with all my credit cards and my passport as well. Could you please wire me some money so that I can get my passport back? That is very blatant. That's old school. Yes, in my time I've received a number of those. I'm sure several of you have as well. But this fraud is much more subtle. Starts off with a semi-casual opening. Are you in the office? Or when you have a moment, could you email me? And certainly in the culture of many UK universities and American universities, this is credible. This is the sort of thing that a genuine head of department might do. Okay, it's not something he doesn't, he wants to have a word with me. It's not a full email setting up policy, but are you in the office? If so, could you drop by? So are you in the office, or when you have a moment, could you email me? Okay. As I say, this is the kind of message that we're used to getting. Next slide. And the email looks credible. That's the sort of email I'm used to receiving. It carries the name of my line manager. And possibly, as I said, often, not always, but sometimes it will have the photo as well. And therefore, from the victim's point of view, it's easy not to notice that the email is different. And even if you do, you might say, oh, they've emailed me from their private email address. Okay, not ask too many questions. And as I say, it's very common to get this kind of email from a head of department who knows that I might be teaching right now, I might be in a meeting, I might be giving a seminar. So, okay, I don't need to speak to you immediately, but when you're free, could you please get in touch? So the colleague emails back, I'm in the seminar right now, but I'll be back in the office at 4:30, or just back in the office after teaching, or I'm available now. Do you want to talk? Next slide. And the victim is now hooked. The conversation has started, and many of us are aware, the psychologists tell us this. Once we've started a conversation, once there's been an interaction, once emails have gone back and forth, psychologically we are now inclined to continue. We're much less likely, after a few emails have gone back and forth, to question whether the sender is genuine. The moment at which I might have said, is this actually my head of department emailing me? That's when the first email approaches. Now, we've been back and forth. Are you in the office right now? No, I'll be back. I'll be back in half an hour. Okay, back now from teaching. I'm now hooked. I'm now psychologically conditioned to believe. So, okay, next slide, please. Okay, keep going. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So now they strike. Could you please help? I've completely forgotten to get my nephew a birthday present, and I'm stuck in a meeting. Hey, we've all been there. Could you go to the store and buy £300 worth of iTunes cards and scan the barcode and scan the barcode. Yeah. I'm sorry. 3 minutes left. Okay. I'll scan and email you the barcodes. I'll reimburse you when I see you tomorrow morning. Okay. It seems a bit high, but it's an unusual request. But I've now been drawn in a bit, and so I'm more amenable to believe the story. And what's more, it's coming from your line manager, so you're more likely to do as you're asked. I know one of my colleagues was a victim. This arrived right at the time that he was making a promotion application. He needs his head department on site. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. So just in case the fraudster then follows up with further emails, have you been able to get them? Because they know that for many of us, work emails go straight through to our smartphones. I might be out at the shop, but ping. So, hey, I need this. It keeps up the sense of urgency. Next slide. Next slide. Hello, next slide. Oh, really? That's the. Okay. In that case, I'll stop this and I'll try to share my own slides. Then, if I can come out of here, if you can give me control back. Okay. So here we go. Right. Vulnerabilities. Now the fraud makes use not just of the email, but also the information on the university website. The department or faculty website will often give the name of the current head department or the dean. I was impressed when I was researching this to see Sebelas Maret does not do this. Many UK, US, Australian universities do this, and give the names and addresses of the names and email addresses of the colleagues. Everything that the crook needs, they can get in a few clicks. And the website will also have features of the colleagues which can be photoshopped into the user ID. So how do we present it? The biggest preventive measure is awareness. A policy that staff should always report any email scam to IT, don't just delete it. And then certify notification throughout the university, informing colleagues of the details of the latest fraud. But you can do more. The names and contact details of colleagues, for all sorts of professional reasons, we need to have those publicly available. But keep the details of who the line managers are to the intranet. So you need to know the name of a colleague. You don't need to know he's head of the department. And have a university policy that colleagues will only contact each other using their work email address. They won't use private email address. But this relies obviously on the victim noticing the address of the sender. For short messages, are you in the office? Have you got a moment? Don't use email, use WhatsApp or text or other messages. That way, if, as my current line manager does that, he uses WhatsApp for quick messages, it makes an opening email, are you in the office, look more unusual. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Richard, for the presentation. Dr. Richard raised the other types of fraud that use email to impersonate the manager or the leader. And yeah, well noted, Dr. Richard, biggest preventive measure is awareness. Thank you so much. So we go to the last speaker for this plenary session. So now we are flying to Solo to meet our last speakers in this plenary session. He is from Universitas 11 Maret, specifically from Accounting Department, Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas 11 Maret. He holds his PhD in Accounting and Finance from University of Twente, Netherlands. His last research to complete his PhD talks about corporate political connections. So, without further ado, Pak Taufik Arifin.
Yes, all right. Yeah, thank you, Yoshia, for the time. Glad to be here to discuss and talk about the recent issue of financial security. More specifically, I'm going to talk about the cyber threat of financial firms, and we can learn few cases how firms deal with it. So you might know that the potential increasing of efficiency, reducing costs, and also improving access to and delivery of financial services makes fintech businesses so attractive. Those financial services mostly come together with the technology and include, but are not limited to, like peer-to-peer lendings, and also online payment, foreign exchange services, digital wallets, e-money, big data, and so on. These features make financial services for customer become faster and then more convenient and also cheaper. Next to a various positive aspect evolving through the growth of financial businesses, new risks and challenges are emerging as well. according to the IBM report, the fintech is under attack. In 2019, for 4 years running, financial firms saw the highest volume of cybersecurity incident over any other industry, more than retail, more than transportation, more than media, and also more than professional services. What I want to highlight for financial institution is that there is a major impact for financial security breaches that other industry don't necessarily have. You may notice that the financial industry breach is typically costing 142%, which is more than other industries. But the most critical number that's up on this slide for me is that when banks is having a security breach, we know that there is a total cost of security breach. And well, what I want to focus on is that in every breach, what we typically see is that bank on firms is losing around 6.1% of the overall customer base. So if you think about it, that is impact not just in the existing breach, but that does to your total financial impact over the long term. So what's more is that the threat landscape is widening. Cyber attack on financial firms are increasingly sophisticated and diverse. We have seen a website-based attack known as a distributed denial of service. So usually hacker foot customer facing bank website with the traffic and take them offline. We have seen also attack on the SWIFT-based money transfer systems. Attack like this have made headlines since at least 2016, when the attackers stole around $81 million from the Central Bank of Bangladesh. And also, maybe 2 years ago, we saw the first ATM malware as a service attack for sale in the dark web. As the previous speaker said, that the dark web is a lower layer of the internet. So it is largely inaccessible to you and also for me, that you need the special tools to get into there, and then also a lot of criminals hang out there, and about 40% of the data on the dark web is related to the financial fraud and also leaked data. We have seen also recently the customer data of Tokopedia is for sale in the dark web. So as you may know that the Tokopedia is one of the largest marketplace in Indonesia. So simply put, this is war. So the John McFarlane, from chairman of Berkeley, said that our traditional defenses are no longer adequate, and this is need the wartime, not peacetime. So urgency. So then what's next? We can learn from few cases. So organizations are responding by shifting from passive cyber defense to more active cyber defense strategies. So what does this mean? Well, the passive strategy is largely reactive, whereas active strategy involves going outside your network and directly engaging with the hackers or the people who try to cause you harm. And we're also looking at the fact that the financial firms are embracing the white hat hackers to battle test their systems. So we have seen maybe like bounty hunter. We have seen companies like PayPal and some Indonesian firms such as Gojek. They do this as well. So, but largely they are following in the footsteps of U.S. Department of Defense, which rolled out a program called the Hack the Pentagon. It is where they say like, okay, hackers, we are going to open up our system and then come and penetrate us and show us what you did, so we can go back and remediate these attacks. And also, we're also seeing bank invest in deception-based security tools that trap hackers. So for example, yes? Okay. So, for example, if you are in certain companies and you have within your network the Cont jewels, your customer data, and you know it is to be protected, and you know hackers are also going for it. So why not to clone the data and make it something that is innocuous and cannot be used to harm anyone, but it looks like the Cont jewels, they are important to you. So when the hackers goes into the system and steals that, it is actually a tracking device. When they leave your system, it takes you all the way back to the lab. So we also actually seeing financial firms look into military intelligence agencies for these different type of active cyber defense strategies. For example, we have seen some firms launch cyber war rooms to coordinate threat intelligence and also response, such as MasterCard, Visa, and also Citigroup, and also the Wells Fargo. And so what's next for security in fintechs? Well, a game-changing fintech security and cyber regulation are on the horizon. So first off, the consumer maybe become active defenders. Or more specifically, we're gonna see firms that champion proactive security put this kind of tools in the hand of consumers. So we already seen innovations such as polymorphic credit cards. This is essentially a credit card when you can link up to 8 different payment methods. It has a small keyboard on it and also screen. It creates a one-time use PIN that significantly reduces card theft and also chance of fraud. So we also seeing things like researchers at the University of Iowa creating synthetic materials that could be placed inside of credit card, such that when the card is stolen, the user can send a signal to the card and rendering it totally unusable. So I think this is the short presentation. Thank you for the time. Enjoy the future and stay healthy. Thank you, Yosia.
Thank you, Dr. Taufik, for your insights. Yeah, so all panelists has presented their insights and their knowledge to all participants. So we have arrived in the Q&A session. For your information, we received so many questions to all panelists, but because we have the limited time, so our committee has selected several questions and it addressed to every panelist. So I will read it one by one, okay? Okay, for the first questions, let me search first. Yes. Okay, for the first question is addressed to Professor Stuart Metnick. Hi, Prof. Metnick.
Hi.
Okay. The question comes from Rudy from Telkom. He asked, is there any way to get and uncover the evidences which is hiding in an international public cloud or someone who using fake ID in social media?
I'm not sure I heard the question, but I did hear the mention of a public cloud.
Yes, and the way to uncover the evidence, to get the evidence.
Well, there's 2 points I want to mention. One, so we didn't mention it much in this talk. More and more organizations are moving to the cloud, which is a lot of technical advantages. But unfortunately, the cloud is also a new technology, and there's been a number of attacks made because people were not using the cloud correctly. So that's just a side issue people should be aware of when they go to the cloud. Regarding identifying people, obviously there are lots of approaches that can be used. In fact, often, as mentioned by other speakers, whistleblowers or insiders who know what's going on can often help you. But one of the things that a really good hacker will do will be not only cover their tracks, but also leave clues to somebody else. So for example, a group of Russian hackers broke into an Iranian hacker site and did their hacks from there in the hope that the Iranians will be blamed for it. So there is, in general, no guaranteed way to track the hackers, but obviously there are ways you can try, and we have succeeded on occasions.
Thank you, Professor Metnick, for the answer. I hope we can answer your question, Mr. Rudy. So we move to the second question, which is addressed to Professor Goodell from Irfan Mangkunegara. He is from the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. He said, it is interesting that you mentioned the national culture variable by Hofstede in building your algorithm to detect money laundering. As you mentioned, there are a lot of literature regarding culture and corruption.
Yes.
Which national culture variable do you use in your algorithm to detect money laundering?
We tried all of the basic Hofstede ones: individualism, uncertainty avoidance, power distance, the so-called masculinity. And many of them had some significances. And we also controlled for cultural distance, which is a very different thing that just simply suggests that there might be cultural distance between the sender and the receiver. But the strongest result was for individualism. And we did not, at this time, we don't distinguish between receiver and the one sending the wire. But we simply use either one in the results. Individualism has been shown to be associated with sort of recklessness and less concern about getting caught in a lot of social psychology studies.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Goodell, for the answer. Now we move to the next questions to Dr. Dominic. It came from Wahyudi Fajrin from the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. He asked, what types of non-cash transactions are generally used by government around the world that are considered as the safest?
Well, I think the reality of that question is that it would, of course, depend on which government you're looking at, and indeed which type of economics that really runs throughout that particular government's ideology. We're seeing a lot of difference of opinion at the moment with various types of non-cash transactions, and of course how that relates to the regulation of financial crime. It's certainly quite clear that, at least from my research, in respect of many UK overseas territories government, they're really opening their minds to the realities of different types of currency, what that could mean for their economies, and perhaps more importantly, to think about it in a broader sense, what it means for various responses of different types of employees, different types of workers coming from jurisdictions all over the world to try and set up in these jurisdictions that are offering far more emphasis on different types of non-cash industry. So really, I think I can't give a single answer as to which one is preferred by governments. It really depends which government you're really looking at.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dominic, for the answer. I hope we can answer your question, Mr. Wahyudi Fajrin from the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. And there is one question which is addressed to the chairman of the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia, Dr. Agung Firman Sampurna, but he has left this meeting. So I will read the questions and also the answer from Dr. Agung Firman Sampurna. The question is, Indonesia ranked 85 in Corruption Perception Index. Indonesia faces now in organization maturity combating corruption. The challenge for Indonesia is to reduce the number of corruption. So what is the role of the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia to answer the challenge? Otherwise, a lot of corruption actors in Indonesia challenge the authority of the Audit Board. So I will read the answer from Dr. Agung. He said, we do not deny that fraudulent acts are still present, but at present, by strengthening the investigate or forensic unit to respond the escalation of financial crimes that result in the state losses, we strive to continuously improve the governance system. Strengthening the system in question is building an effective internal control system. We continue to complement our institutional tools, like forensic laboratories, the use of the latest information technology with reliable applications, and routinely enhance the competencies of our auditor. In short, if anyone challenges our authority, just bring it on. So I would like to say that we need to build governance and culture that fosters accountability. But at the same time, the effort must be linked to its benefit, which is in this case is economic development. So for anyone who submit these questions, just contact our committee so we can send the full answer from Dr. Agung Firman in answering your questions. So thank you. So moving to the next question is the question which is addressed to Dr. Chaiken, Dr. David Chaiken. The question comes from Daniar from Tech Lawyer Jakarta. What most appropriate regulation and practices for government in anticipating, readdressing, and recovering from cyber financial crime? Australia imposes extradition for offenders, and now Indonesia government start to look strategy from Australia approach. Then what are the challenges faced by Australian authority? Dr. David? Hello, Dr. David?
Yes, I think the question essentially is looking at what more can be done to facilitate the identification, tracing, and recovery of assets, corruption assets. The great challenge is not just for Australia, but for every jurisdiction. In your own country, the police and law enforcement agencies have a vast range of powers that can be used to collect evidence, freeze assets, and so forth. Once the money leaves your territory, once the evidence, if the evidence of the crime is outside your country, you have no power. And this applies to everybody. And in order to deal with that, you need to cooperate with other countries. And let me say that cooperation is much better now than it was 30, 40 years ago. Indonesia has really only started along that path, and much more needs to be done in Indonesia, just like in Australia. It took Australia many, many years to build up their system of cooperation with other countries. However, at the same time, we are subject to geopolitical factors. We're all aware at the moment that the extradition treaties that Australia, Canada, United States have with Hong Kong have essentially been suspended. Now that may seem very, very odd, but what I'm trying to say to you is that everything you do outside your jurisdiction, particularly in relation to recovering large amounts of money, requires very close relationships with the other country, not just at the law enforcement level, but also at the political level. And I know, for example, Indonesia and Singapore, there's always this issue about the extradition treaty, whether it should be a treaty or not. But these are things that take a long, long time, and they're very, very fragile. And so what I would encourage Indonesia to do, just like we've done in Australia, and we've still got great problems and challenges, is you need more to work on those areas. And it's not just agreements between police agencies through Interpol or mutual assistance arrangements. The other possibility is getting and using civil cooperation in order to recover the proceeds of crime. So if you've got to look at many, many different aspects in order to deal with this huge challenge. But you know, when I started 30 years ago, there's hardly any cooperation. So we've moved so far, but we need to move even further, and particularly in the area of cybercrime, because to catch cybercrime, you essentially need real time investigations in order to investigate cybercrime.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. David Chaikin, for the answer. The next question is addressed to Professor Younger. Hi, Professor Younger. Okay, so the question is come from Mariana Berliana from the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. She asks, is there any characteristic of the fraudster that related to the specific type of the fraud? Ghost invoice, fraudulent contract, and CEO fraud. Can you unmute your voice first, Professor Younger?
Yes.
Okay.
Didn't see that. Is this about characteristics of fraudster? Is that right?
Yeah, for the related to the specific type of the fraud, like ghost invoice, fraudulent contract, and CEO fraud.
Yeah, I think the problem is, well, we didn't look at this in the study. We didn't have any information on the fraudster. Also, generally, I think it's not a lot of research, and certainly not quantitative research about fraudsters. So I couldn't say a lot about that in relation to the study that I did. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a bit on the situation, the context of the fraud, the type of fraud. And generally, they're probably younger than you might see, because it's not the case that they're all very smart and in high positions in the organization. So they're probably less different from ordinary criminals than you might think. But yeah, what we also know, I think, is that some of these crimes that seem quite serious, like the DDoS attack. You know, we did one study and we saw that many of the DDoS attacks attack educational organizations, institutions in the Netherlands, and that these attacks are connected with, well, the routines of the school, and in all probability, also when we interviewed a few offenders online, you know, often it is either to do something fancy, or it is to avoid tests that these attacks are being conducted. So, yeah, in this case, it's DDoS attacks, you know, directed at educational institutions, and usually it's probably students who commit them for their own, you know, reason, and to some extent related, you know, to their own problems, which is to avoid attack. Yeah, that is what we did in terms of research. And I think that, you know, what you would need to do if you wanted to know more about the fraudsters themselves is to see the category by category, you know, in what context do they work or live, and what are their specific characteristics. That's all I can say.
I may add a brief comment. that quite often these things are also nation-state actors or organized crime. So there's a wide variety of kinds of actors.
Yes, of course. All right, absolutely. Yes, certainly. That's a...
Okay. Do you have a comment, Professor Matlick? Do you want to add the answer?
Well, no,
No,
absolutely.
I was just mentioning. Sorry, I was just mentioning there is an image that the hacker is a single individual, and although that's still often the case, more and more often it's some form of organized crime, which may be independent or in some cases actually affiliated with certain governments. So it is a much larger enterprise than many people realize.
Certainly. I certainly agree with that. It's just a very, very broad category of people.
Okay, thank you, Professor Younger, for the answer. So the next question is addressed to Dr. Baharom. Someone asked how to assess the risk of financial crime, money laundering, and terrorist financing for state-owned enterprises.
Thank you, Yosha. Like I said, when we say that to analyze the risk, the vulnerability, and the threat, so for the state-owned agency, or in Malaysia we call it the government-linked companies, it's still the same. That means the only difference is from a macro level, you go to the micro level. So for these GLCs, it's still within those departments of that procurement and finance department and others. And avoiding the mistakes that have been done by the 1MDB, like I said, the case study, whereby the head of the government was the head of the GLC. And this causes a lot of non-transparency and a lot of stumbling blocks and so on. So to ensure within a GLC, it has to be ensured that the appointment of certain people to a certain responsibility in the procurement, in the finance and others are thought after, and careful consideration are given before appointing these people. And there should always be an element of check and balance. And creating what we call an integrity unit, which is slightly different from an audit, internal audit. An integrity unit will also help us in identifying and tackling the threat at a much earlier level. So appointment of key personnel in GLCs will have to be independent from the political appointment, and it has to have an element of check and balance.
Thank you, Dr. Baharom, for your answer. The next question is addressed to Dr. Richard Alexander. Hi, Dr. Richard. Agus Purnomo asked, how do we keep the officials' data at universities published on the website, while on the other hand, there's a need to be transparency regarding their identities?
It's a difficult balance, particularly as we know the fraudsters keep up to date. So the impersonation fraud that I was talking about has been used to impersonate 3 successive heads of department of my own department. So how do you do it? My suggestion would be that you have, as publicly available for transparency, you have details of colleagues, so their names, their research interests, what they teach, and so on. However, I would suggest that you keep within a separate system, what I've called an intranet, an internal system that is available to colleagues within the university, but not outside, who holds what line management responsibilities. So, for example, and I'll take one from the past. So, for example, you could see that Professor Lawrence Harris is Professor of Macroeconomics, and the world sees that, but only within the university do we see that he is head of the School of Finance and Management. As I say, because of the issue that I've talked about, I'm not going to reveal the name of the current one, but I think that's the best way we can strike the balance. And I think we can also, this is why I was emphasizing other measures. So for the short messages, are you around? Are you in the office right now? If the genuine line managers don't use emails for that, but use WhatsApp, use other messaging systems, using contact details that are available for the line manager to their staff, but not to the wider world, that will make the gentle lead up that the fraudsters use a lot more difficult. I don't think there is an ideal solution. This is why it's used. Why so many universities have been targeted. I have to say, the reason that I chose this topic to talk about was when 3 successive heads of department were impersonated. So clearly the fraudsters were aware when X leaves office and Y replaces him. And so I think that information, who holds positions like head of department, dean, and so on, should be kept within the university.
So thank you, Dr. Richard, for your answer. And 2 questions left. One question is addressed to Pak Taufik Arifin. Someone asked, how do we prevent data theft from e-wallet accounts like OVO, Dana, and etc.?
Okay, thank you, Yoshia, for the questions. So I think, in my opinion, so usually firms or fintech specifically, they should follow the standard of security system like COVID and so on. But the most important, I think, is the awareness of the customer. So the user, when they use the fintech services, they have to be aware that there is a threat and also risk. So in this case, I think the user should be follow the security standard, like for example, they should use like 2-step verification. So they have to use the verified mobile number, because usually, recently the fintech firms, they put the security to the user. So in that case, we can see from the previous case that many cases that when their money gets stolen, they give the 2-step verification code to the fraudster. So but they didn't realize it. So in this case, it is important for the user to be aware that there is a threat. So in that case, they should be understand that to carefully manage their security use. So I think this is very important. That's it, Joshua. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Taufik, for the answer. And the last question is addressed to Pak Iqbal. Mr. Agus Purnomo asked how to increase employee or people awareness to report any fraud that occurs in the organization.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joshua, for the question. I think, as I said before on the slide, we need to make sure that our whistleblowing system that put on the organization cover at least 3 key important things. That first of all, we need support from the high-level management, because this can increase trust from the people, from the public, from the organization member as well. When they trust to our system, when they trust that the report will be followed up, and then we take care it seriously, and then we didn't ignore the report, then they will have more intention to make report. And then the other important things that we need to consider as well is we need to disseminate, we need to spread out the system, the policy to our organization member. If we have like branch office, like the Supreme Audit Board, we have like 34 branch office. We need to communicate, we need to disseminate this policy to at least the majority of our branch office. So it will like reach many people, many organization member, and then they understand what is the system itself, and then what will happen to their report, and then they also believe in the system itself, that we will protecting them, their identity and so forth. And then the last thing is we need to make sure as well that we communicate the proof of actual cases. If we can uncover something significant, then we need to spread out this good news to the organization member and to the public as well. So everybody knows that we again take the report seriously. We didn't ignore them, and then everybody know about this. I think that's the important thing to do to increase and to enhance the public awareness, and then the public attention as well to report. Thank you very much, Josia, for the time.
Thank you, Dr. Iqbal, for the answer. And yeah, the questions from participants to Dr. Iqbal has ended the Q&A session. Because we have the limited time, so we have to end this Q&A session. And yeah, it has been a great discussions where we have 9 invited speakers in this plenary session. I would like to say thank you so much for your participation, especially for all invited speakers. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and insight to all of us here in this international webinar. And I would like to say thank you also to all participants who has joined this international webinar since the beginning until the end of this webinar. And I would like to say thank you also to Universitas 11 Maret, and especially to the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia, who has made all things possible, who makes all this webinar possible to be done. So thank you so much for the support. And for all participants, do not forget to fill the attendance list in the link that the committee has shared, so we can. It will help us to distribute the e-certificate and also the materials. And also we need your feedback, so you can put your feedback in the link that the committee has shared. And before we close this international webinar, I would like to invite all participants and all invited speakers to turn on the video. We will do the virtual photo session since it is conducted through Zoom cloud meetings and YouTube and Instagram. So we do the virtual photo session. You can say hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your participation. Okay. Yeah, I think that's enough. Okay, so thank you so much for all invited speakers, for all participants, to Universitas 11 Maret and Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia for joining this webinar. Thank you so much. Hope you guys have a nice day. And we apologize if there is something wrong with the international webinar, so we need your feedback for our evaluation. So don't forget to subscribe our university YouTube channel, Universitas 11 Maret, and also the Instagram of Center for Fintech and Banking, Universitas 11 Maret, for knowing the next event. So thank you so much. Hope you enjoy the day, and goodbye.
Bye.
So thank you, Pak Taufik, Dr. David Chaikin, Professor Marian Younger, Professor Stuart McNeil,
Thank